I should have known the evening was scripted long before I even sat down at the table. That house, my parents' house, always carried a performance quality about it. The laughter too bright, the tablecloth too pressed, the casserole too familiar. Every Sunday felt like a rerun of a show that should have been canceled seasons ago. But this particular Sunday had a sharper edge to it. My mother's smile when she opened the door was stretched, a little too rehearsed. Her lipstick was a shade she only wore when she wanted to distract from something else. My father gave me a distracted nod, muttered a quick "hey kiddo," and disappeared toward the dining room as though the hallway might swallow him whole if he lingered. Adrian was already at the table, hunched over his phone, scrolling with the focused intensity of someone trying not to exist. He didn't look up when I came in. That was normal. He never looked up until the moment someone demanded attention. I slipped into my usual seat, the one across from him, and let my hands rest on the linen napkin folded like a swan. It was the same swan Mom had folded for as long as I could remember. Tradition, she called it. Habit, I thought. A paper-thin attempt at holding our chaos together. We made it through the salad first. My mother talked about the weather as if she'd invented it, clinking her fork against the edge of her plate whenever a pause lasted too long. My father filled his glass with water, then wine, then water again. Adrian poked at the lettuce leaves like they might bite him. I chewed quietly, nodded in the right places, and waited for the curtain to drop. Because there was always a curtain, always something rehearsed behind the casual chatter, always an announcement waiting to be unwrapped like a bomb in gift wrap. When the silence fell too clean, too staged, I knew we had arrived at the main act. Mom set down her fork, folded her hands, and smiled with the softness of someone about to deliver a blow. "Liliana," she began, her voice gentler than it ever was when she was actually happy, "your brother has had a rough stretch lately. We've been talking, and we've all agreed it's time for him to have a fresh start. So?" She glanced at Dad, who stared into his glass. Then she looked at me with a hopeful tilt of her head. "Adrian will be moving in with you for a little while." The words were practiced, careful. They dropped between us like a stone in a shallow pool, ripples spreading across the table. Adrian finally looked up, just for a second, enough to confirm that yes, this was the plan. His lips pressed into something that almost resembled gratitude but carried the smug relief of a man handed a parachute before anyone else noticed the plane was on fire. Dad cleared his throat, already bracing for the storm. I could see it in his shoulders, the way he hunched like he was preparing to absorb a blow that had nothing to do with him. And me, I smiled, not the brittle smile I usually wore to keep the peace, not the forced curve of lips that said, "Fine, I'll do it, just don't call me ungrateful." No, this was different. "Of course," I said lightly, tilting my head just enough to make it sound believable. "If it helps Adrian get back on his feet, I don't see why not." The silence that followed was delicious. Mom blinked, startled, as if I'd skipped my line. Dad exhaled sharply, relieved. Adrian leaned back, smugness blooming like mold in the corners of his expression. They thought I had caved. They thought the strong daughter, the reliable one, had once again folded neatly into their script. None of them noticed how still I became after that. None of them saw the calm that wasn't surrender but something sharper, something final. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that the apartment they believed I still lived in had been sold weeks ago. I didn't tell them that. Not yet. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, lifted it to my lips, and let the bitter taste coat my tongue while my family carried on with their fantasy. Dinner stretched on like a poorly written play. Mom filled the silence with anecdotes about her book club, as though her friends' opinions on a mystery novel had any weight in this room. Dad kept glancing at his phone, pretending to check the time when really he was avoiding my eyes. Adrian chewed with the slow arrogance of someone who knew the future had already been arranged for him. "Your place is perfect for him," Mom said between bites of casserole. "Quiet neighborhood, plenty of space. And you work such long hours, dear, he can help keep the place from feeling so empty." I nodded. "Right, that makes sense." Inside, a different voice whispered, "You have no idea, do you? Not one clue that you're planning an invasion of a castle that no longer exists." Adrian smirked. "I'll take the smaller room, don't worry, I'll bring my own stuff. Won't be a burden." The laugh that nearly escaped me would have ruined everything. Instead, I bit my lip and pressed my napkin against it, pretending I caught a crumb. "You've never washed your own dishes, Adrian, not once. But sure, tell yourself you'll carry your own weight." Dad finally spoke, his voice edged with the authority he only used when he wanted to sound like the reasonable one. "It's only temporary, Liliana, just until he finds his footing." Temporary. That word had lived in our house like a permanent guest. Temporary debts, temporary jobs, temporary setbacks. But temporary always meant me paying, me cleaning up, me carrying. I raised my glass again, nodded. Of course. Mom looked relieved, radiant even. Like she'd just orchestrated a symphony instead of delivered another command. I knew you, understand. You've always been so dependable. That word, dependable, landed like a slap I didn't flinch from. They meant it as praise. I heard it as a chain. After dinner, we lingered in the living room, or rather, they lingered. I sat, hands folded in my lap, while Adrian stretched across the couch like he already lived there. Mom fetched tea, humming as if this was a celebration. Dad sat in his chair, rubbing his temples as though the night had exhausted him when he'd barely spoken. Mom launched into logistics, her words spilling faster now that she believed victory was hers. We'll bring his mattress over Saturday morning, she said. Robert can load the boxes Friday night. Adrian has a desk and some shelves, nothing too heavy. And don't worry, Liliana, we'll clean up your place before he moves in. Make sure it's nice for both of you. My place. The phrase almost made me laugh out loud. My place that no longer exists. My place that belongs to someone else now. My place I walked away from in silence while you weren't looking. Adrian leaned forward, grinning. I'll even bring my own dishes. I pressed my fingers against my knee under the table, grounding myself. That's thoughtful. The conversation went on like that, plans upon plans layered on top of lies they didn't know they were telling themselves. I sat still, smiled when expected, nodded when required, and tucked away every word like evidence in a trial they hadn't realized was already underway. Because here's the truth, I hadn't been living in that apartment for weeks. I'd packed my things in silence, sold it quietly, moved into a smaller place across town. No one asked where, and I hadn't offered. Not out of cruelty, not even out of anger. But because sometimes the only way to breathe is to disappear. And now, watching them chart Adrian's future in a home that wasn't mine anymore, I felt the strangest thing of all. Not guilt, not fear, relief. The tea cooled on the coffee table while my mother kept talking. Her words were like wallpaper, pasted over every silence. Adrian, been through so much, she said, stirring sugar into her cup though she never drank it sweet. It's not his fault. The world is harder for him. Some people just need more support. Her eyes landed on me as if I were the support beam she had spent 30 years leaning on. I nodded slowly, swirling the tea in my cup. Of course. What I didn't say, you've built this entire house on my back and you still call it his struggle. Adrian stretched, yawning dramatically. It'll be good for both of us. I'll have space to reset and you won't be so alone. The arrogance of it might have burned once. Tonight, it only made me tired. Alone, yes. That word had been thrown at me like an accusation for years. You're too independent, too detached, too focused on yourself. As though solitude were a flaw instead of a choice. If they only knew. If they had seen the nights I lay awake in my new apartment, silence wrapping around me like a blanket, realizing for the first time that the air I breathed was mine. No one asking, no one taking, just quiet, but they didn't know and I didn't correct them. My father finally leaned forward, setting his glass down with a thud that sounded heavier than the wine deserved. Let's not make this a debate, he said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who hadn't spoken in half an hour. It's decided. Adrian needs stability. Liliana can provide that. End of story. End of story. How many times had I heard that phrase? Whenever I tried to raise my voice, whenever I hinted that maybe I didn't want to be the designated savior, that phrase arrived like a gavel. End of story. I pressed the rim of the teacup against my lips, hiding the smile that wanted to form. The story has already ended. You just haven't caught up yet. Mom beamed at Dad as if he'd solved something monumental. Adrian smirked at me, like we were conspirators in his rescue mission. I only sipped my tea and kept my silence. Later, as we cleared the dishes, Mom brushed my arm. You've always been such a blessing, she said softly. We're so lucky to have a daughter like you. Blessing, dependable, cold, useful. I had worn them all like name tags at a party I never wanted to attend. I forced a small smile. Thanks, Mom. But in my chest, the words hardened. A blessing doesn't owe you her life. By the time I left, the sky had turned the bruised color of twilight. My parents stood on the porch, waving as though the evening had been a triumph. Adrian slouched in the doorway, arms crossed, already picturing the room he believed was waiting for him. See you Saturday, Mom called. Drive safe, Dad added. Adrian only grinned. Thanks, sis, I waved back, slid into my car and closed the door. The sound of it shutting felt like a wall rising between us. As I drove away, headlights carving through the dark, I let the mask slip. The smile fell. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles whitened. They thought I had surrendered. They thought the dependable daughter had accepted her assignment once again, but they were preparing to move into a place that no longer existed, and that knowledge filled me with a quiet power I hadn't felt in years. When I reached my apartment, the real one, the new one, I paused at the door. The key slid into the lock with ease, a sound that still startled me with relief. No shared memories in these walls. No expectations soaked into the carpet, just space. Mine. Inside, the living room smelled faintly of new paint and possibility. No family photos, no inherited furniture. Just the couch I'd chosen, the lamp I'd bought secondhand, the books stacked unevenly on a shelf I assembled myself. Imperfect. Quiet. Free. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, kicked off my shoes, and sank onto the couch. The silence pressed close, not heavy, not suffocating, just present. For a moment, I closed my eyes. The evening replayed itself in my mind. Mom's rehearsed smile, Dad's gavel voice, Adrian's smug relief. I felt no anger, only confirmation. They still believed I belonged to them. They had no idea I had already walked away. And that was how the story began. Not with an explosion, not with a dramatic fight, but with a smile across a dinner table and a secret I carried like armor. They thought I said yes. I knew I had already said no. The night after that dinner, I sat in my apartment with the lights off, staring at the ceiling as the hum of the fridge filled the silence. The quiet was supposed to comfort me. Most nights it did. But tonight, my mind wouldn't stop replaying old scenes, like a reel of film I never agreed to watch. Because when my family made declarations, when they spoke as though my life belonged to them, it was never in isolation. Every new demand was built on the ruins of the old ones. And I carried those ruins like stones in my pockets. I was 21 the first time I learned just how heavy those stones could get. Adrian's car had been repossessed. He called me crying, his voice cracked with panic. "Liliana, I can't get to work. I just got this job. I swear this one's different. Please, I just need a little help." I was young enough to believe him, young enough to believe that a clean credit score was meant to be shared. I co-signed the loan for the new car. 3 weeks later, Adrian stopped showing up to work. He missed the payments. And guess whose credit took the hit? I remember staring at the letter from the bank, my hands trembling as though the paper itself burned. I remember my mother's voice on the phone, warm and pleading. "He's struggling, Liliana. He just needs time. You're stable. You can help." Stable, dependable. Words meant to flatter, but they always arrived wrapped around a command. I paid the bill. I cleaned the mess. I let my credit absorb the blow, and when I asked Adrian about it later, he only shrugged. "It's just money." But it wasn't just money, it was the first crack. 2 years later, another stone landed in my pocket. I was 23 when Dad lost his job. The mortgage was past due. Mom called me in tears. "We're drowning, sweetheart. We don't know what to do. Adrian's back home. We can't keep up." I wired $2,000 the next morning. No hesitation. No questions. No one thanked me. At Christmas, my mother handed me a mug that read "World's Best Daughter." She beamed like it was a crown. I almost laughed, because love in our house was a transaction, and my payments kept it alive. At 25, the stones grew heavier. Adrian was arrested for a DUI. I still remember the call, Dad's voice low, urgent. "We can't let this get out. It'll ruin him. It'll ruin all of us. Please, Liliana, cover the lawyer just this once." Just this once. The most dangerous phrase in our vocabulary, "I paid the lawyer." Adrian never said thank you. A year later, he was pulled over again. This time, I refused, and Mom's voice cut like a knife through the phone line. "You've never understood what it means to worry for someone you love." She said it like a curse. She said it like my refusal proved I was heartless. She said Adrian's life was harder than mine, that I had no right to withhold. That was the moment I knew, not suspected. Knew. They didn't see me. They didn't see my work, my exhaustion, my sacrifices. They saw a function. A faucet to turn on whenever the house caught fire. A wallet that smiled. A lifeline that never frayed. And in their story, I wasn't a daughter. I was a resource. The memories rolled over me in waves, each one heavier than the last. Sitting there in my dim apartment, I whispered to no one, "No wonder I left." Because the truth was, the condo I sold hadn't been mine for years. Oh, my name was on the deed, my money paid the mortgage, but the space was never truly mine. Every corner held an expectation, every room carried the weight of hours. When I sold it, it wasn't just a transaction. It was preservation. It was claiming air to breathe. And yet, they still sat at that dinner table, speaking of me as if my body were a piece of furniture to rearrange. They thought they were protecting Adrian. What they were really protecting was their illusion that I would never stop saving him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, watching headlights crawl across my ceiling. My phone buzzed on the nightstand with messages I didn't open. I didn't need to, I knew the rhythm. Shock, anger, guilt, pleading, always in that order. It would start with "We're so grateful, Liliana," then shift into "You can handle it better than anyone," and eventually curdle into "Don't be so selfish." I rolled onto my side, pulling the blanket tighter. Selfish. Maybe that's what freedom feels like to people who have never known it. The night after the dinner, I didn't turn on the lights when I got home. I wanted the dark. I wanted the quiet. I sat on the couch with my coat still on, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, and I stared at nothing. The words from that dinner echoed, rehearsed and hollow. "Adrian will be moving in with you for a little while." My mother's voice, sweetened like tea with too much sugar. My father's silence, his complicit nod. Adrian's smug glance, and my own voice, calm, agreeable, saying yes. If someone had walked past me right then, they would have thought I was calm. But inside, memories swarmed. Old demands, old obligations, old sacrifices I had never signed up for. They didn't come as a neat sequence. They came jagged, flashing, one bleeding into another, like cuts reopening all at once. I was 21 when I learned how invisible gratitude could be. Adrian called me sobbing. His car had been repossessed. He said he couldn't get to work, that he'd finally gotten a job worth keeping, that this time was different. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. "My credit's shot," he said. "Please, Liliana, just co-sign just this once. I swear I'll keep up with the payments." I remember the way his voice broke, the desperation that sounded so much like sincerity. I signed. I put my name, my future, my clean credit on the line because I thought that's what family meant. 3 weeks later, he stopped going to work. The payments lapsed, the notices arrived, and when I asked him, he only shrugged. "It's just money." But it wasn't just money. It was the first crack in a foundation I had been told was unshakable. At 23, another weight. Dad lost his job, the mortgage was late. Mom called me in tears, voice shaking like the world was ending. "We're drowning, sweetheart. Adrian's back home. We can't keep up. Please, we don't know what to do." I wired $2,000 the next morning. I didn't even think about it. I skipped rent, pulled from my savings, told myself I'd catch up later. No one thanked me, not really. That Christmas, Mom handed me a mug that read "World's Best Daughter." She smiled like it was a crown. I wanted to laugh or maybe scream, but I only smiled back because what else was I supposed to do? At 25, the cracks widened. Adrian was arrested for a DUI. The call came late, my father's voice low and panicked. "We can't let this get out," he whispered. "It'll ruin him. It'll ruin all of us. Please, Liliana, just this once. Cover the lawyer. Just this once." The family's favorite refrain. I paid, again, thousands gone. Adrian didn't even look me in the eye afterward. He didn't apologize, he didn't thank me, he just acted like it had never happened. A year later, he was pulled over again. This time I said no. Mom's voice on the phone turned sharp, brittle. "You've never understood what it means to worry for someone you love. You're so cold, Liliana. His life is harder than yours, you don't get it." That was the moment it clicked, not suspected. Knew, they didn't see me. They didn't see the nights I stayed late at work, the bills I balanced, the fear that kept me awake. They didn't see the sacrifices I stacked like bricks. They saw a faucet, a wallet, a lifeline, and lifelines in their eyes didn't need rest. By 26, the pattern was carved into stone. Adrian dropped out of college. I'd paid for part of his tuition the semester before because Mom swore he was turning things around. 2 months in, he quit. "The professors are unfair," he said. "It wasn't a good fit." When I refused to cover the next semester, Mom's voice sharpened again. "You're lucky, Liliana. Things come easier for you. Don't you want to help him?" Lucky. That word was poison. They used it like a fact, like all my nights studying, all my careful work, all the sacrifices I made for myself didn't matter. They called it luck. And they called him fragile. And that equation always ended with me paying the price. Then came the night I'll never forget. Adrian showed up at my condo at 2 in the morning. He was drunk, furious, pounding on the door until the neighbors peeked out. His voice was too loud, his words slurred. "Just let me stay for one night," he demanded, leaning against the wall like he owned it. I let him in. I gave him a blanket. I cleaned up the beer he spilled on my carpet, washed the dishes he left in the sink. The next day, he left without a word. When I confronted Mom, she sighed, her voice dripping with exhaustion. "He's going through so much, Liliana. You don't understand. You've never had real struggles." The laugh I wanted to release caught in my throat. I swallowed it. I always swallowed it. By 30, the cracks had widened so far I couldn't see solid ground anymore. I sat in my condo, the one I had worked years to afford, and realized it wasn't mine. Not really. Every knock at the door carried dread. Every buzz of my phone carried obligation. My living room, my kitchen, my bedroom, none of it felt like mine. It was theirs, because when they wanted something, it was always ours. Our money, our space, our time. I sat staring at the front door, realizing I didn't feel safe in my own home. Not because of danger, but because it was never mine. So I called a realtor. I sold the condo. Quietly. No announcement, no permission, no fanfare. I moved across the city into a smaller place. Neutral walls, no history, no weight. For the first time, I breathed, and I didn't tell them, not because I wanted revenge, not even because I wanted to hurt them, but because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is disappear. That night, on my couch in the dark, I whispered aloud to the empty room, "No wonder I left." Because when survival comes with strings, sometimes the bravest act is cutting them. The following morning, sunlight pushed through the blinds, thin and pale. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee cooling between my hands. The flowers I'd bought from the street vendor leaned slightly in their jar, bright against the muted walls. I stared at them as if they could anchor me, but the weight of old memories pressed harder. At 27, Adrian's debts had reached a new scale. Credit cards, payday loans, things I didn't even know existed until the collectors called the house. My mother phoned me one night, her voice frantic. "Please, Liliana, they're going to come after him. He's made mistakes, but he's trying. Can't you just help a little?" Help a little meant thousands of dollars. It meant draining the emergency fund I'd been building for years. It meant sleepless nights calculating how I'd make up the gap. But I did it because what else could I do? I told myself it was the last time. I told myself that every time. He didn't say thank you. He didn't even acknowledge it. And when I asked if he had a plan to pay anything back, he laughed. "Money always works out. Stop stressing, Liliana." The rage burned so hot that night I thought I might choke on it. But I didn't scream, I didn't fight, I swallowed it like always. At 28, the family story had shifted again. Adrian wasn't irresponsible, they said. He was unlucky, he wasn't reckless, he was misunderstood. And me, I was dependable, always dependable. The word felt like a leash around my neck. One night he came over uninvited, dropped onto my couch, and announced he was staying for a while. My chest went tight, but I said nothing. I cooked him dinner. I washed the dishes. I watched my own home shrink around me. When he finally left, Mom called to scold me for not being warmer. "He just needs love, Liliana. You've always been so cold." Cold. That word haunted me more than selfish ever did. Cold implied I had failed at being human, failed at being their daughter. But I wasn't cold. I was tired. By 29, I had perfected the art of politeness. I didn't scream when they asked for more. I didn't fight when they shifted another burden onto me. I just smiled, nodded, and said things like, "I'll think about it," or "Let me see what I can do." Small evasions that still left them hopeful. They noticed. They didn't like it. The last straw wasn't dramatic. It was an ordinary night, sitting alone in my condo, staring at the door. The furniture around me was mine. I had chosen it, paid for it, moved it in with my own hands. And yet the space felt borrowed. Every time the phone buzzed, every time a knock rattled the door, I braced myself. It was never just me. It was always us. And us meant them. I realized in that moment that I didn't feel safe. Not because of crime, not because of danger, but because the one place I was supposed to call my own wasn't mine at all. It belonged to their emergencies, their needs, their endless crises. So I picked up the phone. I called a realtor. Within weeks, the condo was listed, sold, gone. Packing was quiet rebellion. Each box I filled felt like reclaiming something I didn't know I had lost. My dishes, my books, my clothes, all mine. The silence as I worked was almost holy. When I locked the door for the last time, I whispered goodbye, not to the condo, but to the version of me that had lived like a permanent lifeline. I moved into a small apartment across the city. Neutral walls, clean lines, no history. No one knew where I was. No one asked. For the first time in years, I could walk into my own home without flinching, without bracing for impact. I could breathe. I told myself it was preservation, not betrayal. But I knew how they would see it. They would call it abandonment. They would call it cruel. They would call me cold. The phone buzzed on the table, snapping me back. Another message from Mom. She had been sending them all week. "We'll bring the mattress Saturday morning." Robert's packing the boxes Friday night. Adrian's excited to have his own space. Each text assumed I would open the door. Each one carried the weight of expectation. They were speaking to a version of me that no longer existed. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I sat back, sipped my coffee, and let the silence stretch around me. They thought they still owned me. They thought I was still the dependable daughter, the cold but useful one. They thought they could script my life like another family dinner. But what they didn't know, what they had never bothered to imagine, was that I had already walked away. And soon, they were going to find out just how far gone I was. Saturday mornings used to be my time. I would go to the market, wander through stalls of fruit and flowers, let the hours pass without anyone needing me. But this Saturday was different. I woke early, sat by the window with a mug of coffee, and listened to the city wake up. Somewhere across town, my family was loading boxes into the trunk of Dad's car, wrapping dishes in newspaper, folding Adrian's clothes into bags. They believed they were marching toward a new beginning. They believed they were carrying him toward stability, and they believed I was waiting with open arms. They believed in a version of me that no longer existed. My phone started buzzing at 9. A cheerful text from Mom: "We're on our way soon. Adrian is so excited. Thank you, sweetheart." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed and then set the phone face down. Outside the window, a bus rolled past, people climbing aboard with coffees in hand, backpacks slung over their shoulders. Ordinary lives, lives not built on someone else's constant demands. By 10, there were 2 missed calls. By 11:04, I ignored them all. I poured another cup of coffee, sliced an apple, and ate it slowly, each bite reminding me that I had no obligation to answer. It wasn't defiance. It was freedom. Around noon, the 6th call came. This time it was Dad. His voice on the voicemail was clipped, formal, stripped of patience. "We're here, call us back." I could picture it with painful clarity. The car parked outside the condo I no longer owned. The trunk stuffed with boxes. Adrian leaning against the hood, trying to look casual while carrying the weight of entitlement he had never had to put down. Mom smiling, trying to turn this into a family triumph. Dad already weary, already resentful. None of them suspecting what was waiting on the other side of that door. At 2:15, my phone rang again. I let it buzz 4 times before answering. Mom's voice burst through, sharp and brittle. "Liliana, what's going on?" I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air. "There's a man here," she continued, her voice rising. "He says he lives in the condo. He says you don't live here anymore. What is happening?" I leaned back on the couch and let the stillness of my new apartment hold me. "That's true," I said evenly. "I don't live there anymore." Her silence was raw, immediate. I could hear shuffling in the background, Dad's low voice, Adrian muttering curses. "You didn't tell us," she snapped. "You never said a word." "No," I agreed. "I didn't." "You sold it." "Yes, weeks ago." The sound that came through the line was something between a gasp and a cry. "You what?" "I moved out quietly," I said. "I didn't think it mattered. No one asked where I lived, so I didn't say." For a moment there was nothing but chaos. Bags rustling, voices overlapping, Dad's voice sharp with anger, Adrian's growing louder. I pictured them standing on the porch, stunned, holding pieces of a plan that no longer existed. "You lied to us," Dad said finally, his tone cutting through the noise. "You said Adrian could move in." I closed my eyes, feeling the calm that came with telling the truth out loud. "No," I said, "if it helps Adrian, I don't see why not." I never said where. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Adrian's voice exploded through it, raw and furious. "So what, we're just supposed to figure it out? You think this is funny?" "No," I said softly. "I think it's overdue." I imagined their faces, disbelief curdling into anger, shock into betrayal. For years I had been the reliable one, the cold one, the resource they could depend on. And now, in a single moment, they were forced to see me as something else. Someone who had left. Mom's voice broke through again, quieter now, trembling. "Liliana, why would you do this?" "Because I was tired, because I deserved peace, because I wanted a life not dictated by their emergencies." But I didn't say any of that. I only said I wanted a home that was mine. The line went quiet. I let it. For the first time, I let silence do the work. By 3, the calls had stopped. My phone lay still on the table. I walked through the apartment, touching the edges of the life I had built. The couch. The books, the lamp by the window, everything chosen by me for me. I opened the window wide and let the city air rush in. It smelled of car exhaust, hot concrete, and something sweet from the bakery down the street. It smelled like freedom. I knew this wasn't the end. My family had never been good at letting go. They would regroup, rewrite the story, find a new way to push. But for now, in this pause, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Evening light crept across the walls of my apartment like a slow tide. The pale orange faded to gray, and shadows stretched long across the floor. I sat on the couch with my legs tucked beneath me, cradling a cup of tea. My phone rested on the coffee table, the screen dark, but I could almost feel the heat of their anger pulsing through it. Silence never meant surrender in my family. It meant regrouping. It meant a new tactic, a fresh attempt to bend me back into place. At 4:30, the silence broke. A message from Adrian appeared on the screen, blunt and sharp. "You're unbelievable." I smiled to myself, a small, private smile that felt like defiance. Yes, I was unbelievable. Finally. After years of being predictable, after years of saying yes, after years of letting them map out my life like a road they owned, I had done something they couldn't fathom. I had said no without raising my voice, without slamming a door, without apology. The next wave arrived quickly. Mom first. "Please, sweetheart, just talk to us. This isn't like you, we don't understand." Her words were soft, pleading, but I could hear the shape of them, the manipulation tucked beneath. She wasn't asking me to explain. She was asking me to fall back into character, to be the daughter who always smoothed things over, who always absorbed the storm. Then Dad's voicemail. His tone was flat, measured, but the edge was unmistakable. "You can't do this to your family. You can't walk away from your responsibilities. Adrian needs you, we all need you." He always framed it as duty, as something noble, but I could hear the anger underneath. It wasn't about duty, it was about losing control. Adrian's messages were shorter, sharper. "You're pathetic. You'll regret this." Typical. He always went for the quick strike, the insult designed to wound. He wanted to provoke, to pull me back into the fight, but I didn't take the bait. I set the phone face down again and lifted the cup to my lips. Outside my window, the world kept moving. A woman jogged past in neon sneakers, her ponytail bouncing. A man carried 2 bags of groceries that looked too heavy for him, one slipping down his arm. Children's laughter drifted up from the street as they kicked a ball between parked cars. A dog barked, a horn honked, a bicycle bell rang. Life went on, ordinary and unbothered. No one out there cared that my family was unraveling in front of a condo that no longer belonged to me. No one demanded I fix it. That anonymity, that irrelevance was a balm I hadn't known I needed. I stood by the window, pressing my palm against the cool glass and let myself breathe. I imagined them still outside the condo. Adrian pacing, furious, his face red with indignation. Mom's tears spilling as she clutched her phone, her voice shrill with disbelief. Dad's jaw tight, his hands gripping the wheel of the car, muttering that I had gone too far. I could see it so clearly that it felt real. And for the first time, I wasn't part of it. I was an observer, separate, free. At 6, the calls stopped. The silence was thick, charged with everything they hadn't said yet. I knew this rhythm too well. First came shock, then anger, then guilt, then pleading, always in that order. I could feel the cycle turning, could almost predict the next line they would deliver. Mom would remind me of the times I had held Adrian's hand when we were children. Dad would talk about blood and loyalty. Adrian would throw insults like stones. They would weave their story, and in that story I would be the villain. The cold daughter, the selfish sister. But the difference now was simple. I didn't care. I walked into the kitchen, rinsed my cup, and glanced at the flowers on the counter. They had begun to droop, petals curling slightly at the edges. I adjusted them in the jar, gave them fresh water, and placed them back in the light. They were small, ordinary flowers, but they were mine. Chosen not to impress, not to prove, not to rescue, just because I wanted them. That small act felt like rebellion. Back in the living room, the air was still, almost sacred. I sat in the quiet and thought about what my mother had said on the phone. "This isn't like you." She was wrong. It was exactly like me. It was the part of me she had never acknowledged, the part she had ignored every time she needed something. The part that was no longer willing to carry the weight of 3 other people. I let my mind wander to the drive home they must be making by now. Adrian sulking in the backseat, his anger loud and childish. Mom crying, her words spilling too quickly, blaming me, defending him. Dad silent, his grip on the steering wheel too tight, his eyes fixed on the road, simmering with disappointment. Their house waiting for them, filled with boxes they had packed for a move that would never happen. Plans collapsing, not because of me, but because they had assumed I would always say yes. The thought didn't make me guilty, it made me lighter. For once, they would carry the weight of their own choices. For once, I wasn't there to cushion the fall. The sky outside turned violet, then navy. The first stars appeared, faint but steady. I turned off the lamp, letting the room sink into dusk. My phone lit up once more with a notification, a final attempt. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew the rhythm. I knew the script. And for the first time, I had stepped off the stage. When I finally went to bed that night, the apartment was quiet. No knocks on the door, no buzzing phone, no demands waiting to be answered. Just silence, just space, just mine. As I drifted into sleep, one thought lingered, steady and unshakable. This was the twist they never saw coming, not because I had lied, not because I had betrayed them, but because they had never once considered that I might choose myself. And that was exactly what I had done. The first thing I noticed when I woke was the quiet. It wasn't the fragile kind of quiet that comes after an argument, the kind that feels like a bruise you don't want to touch. It was heavier, steadier, like a blanket laid across my life. The kind of quiet that says nothing is expected of you, not now, not yet. I lay there for a long moment, staring at the pale light filtering through the curtains, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had woken like this. Without a list of demands waiting, without someone else's problem already pressing against my chest before I even swung my legs out of bed. When I finally stood, the floor was cool beneath my feet. I padded into the kitchen, barefoot, stretching my arms overhead. The apartment still carried the faint scent of yesterday's tea, a soft reminder of the moment I had chosen myself over them. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove, listening to the hollow rush of water. The sound was ordinary, nothing dramatic, but it felt almost sacred. As the kettle warmed, I drifted toward the window and leaned against the frame. Below, the city was already awake. Delivery trucks rumbled down the narrow street, brakes squealing as they paused at corners. A woman with a red scarf hurried by, balancing a paper cup of coffee in one hand and tugging a small child with the other. Across the street, a man rolled down the shutters of his bakery, chalking the day's specials on the board. The smell of bread drifted up faintly, warm and sweet, cutting through the cool air. The whistle of the kettle startled me back to the kitchen. I poured the water over a tea bag, watching the color bloom and spread, the steam rising in curls. The mug warmed my hands as I carried it back to the window. I stood there sipping slowly, letting the heat settle into me. My phone was still on the counter. I hadn't touched it since the night before. Its black screen felt almost ominous, like a door I didn't want to open. But curiosity pulled at me. I set my mug down and picked up the phone, swiping it awake. The notifications glowed like tiny alarms. 8 new messages. 3 from Mom, 2 from Dad, 3 from Adrian. Mom's words came first. "Please call me. We don't understand why you did this." Family doesn't shut each other out. Her tone tried to sound loving, but the weight of accusation lay under every word. Dad's were shorter. "Call me now. This behavior is unacceptable." I could practically hear his clipped, authoritarian voice, the same voice he had used when I was a child caught out after curfew. Except now I wasn't a child. Adrian's were predictable. "You're pathetic. You'll regret this." Then a third one filled with insults so careless I didn't bother reading twice. I set the phone back down on the counter, face down again, and turned away. For a moment the words lingered in the room like smoke, but they dissolved quickly. I refused to fan them into flame. Instead, I moved through the apartment with deliberate care. I opened the windows to let in fresh air. I folded the blanket draped across the couch. I arranged the books stacked on the coffee table into a neat pile. Small, domestic tasks, but each one grounded me further into the space, into the life I had claimed as mine. By mid-morning, the rooms gleamed with order. I wiped the counters, polished the mirrors, shook the dust from the curtains. The scent of lemon cleaner clung to my hands. Cleaning was something my mother used to do with a fury, as if she could scrub away all the disappointments clinging to her life. For me, it wasn't fury, it was affirmation. Every polished surface whispered, "This is mine, mine alone." When I sat down again, tea refreshed, I let myself think about the inevitable. They wouldn't stop. They never had. Every silence was only a pause before the next storm. Yesterday had been shock. Today would be anger. Tomorrow, guilt. I knew the cycle too well. I closed my eyes and could almost hear their voices. Mom reminding me of childhood. "Remember how you used to take care of Adrian when he was small? He needs you again." Dad reminding me of duty. Family doesn't turn its back. You carry the name Patterson, and with it comes responsibility. Adrian, of course, sneering. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" For years, those words had worked. For years, I had given in, had shouldered their burdens until my back bent beneath the weight. But not now. I opened my laptop and began to type. Not a letter, not a reply. A record, my own ledger. I started with the earliest memory I could recall of carrying Adrian's weight. Age 12, when he broke the neighbor's window and I lied, said it was me. Age 15, when he failed his classes and I stayed up late tutoring him while my own homework lay undone. Age 19, when he was caught with drugs and I was the one who convinced the officer to let him off with a warning. Then the debts. The credit card I paid. The landlord I placated. The endless trail of rescues that no one had ever acknowledged but everyone had counted on. Line after line, I filled the page. Dates, amounts, names, each memory carved into text, each sacrifice made visible. When I finally leaned back, my fingers stiff, the document stretched across several pages. Years of proof. Years of silence broken into words. I stared at it, my throat tight. No wonder I was tired. No wonder I had left. The pattern was undeniable. I had been their safety net for so long that they no longer believed I could step away. But here it was in black and white, evidence that I had already given enough. I saved the file and closed the laptop, the click of the lid like a final period at the end of a sentence. My heart slowed, the weight in my chest easing. This was preparation, not fear. If they came at me with guilt, I would have proof. If they tried to rewrite the story, I would hold the original script. The sun shifted higher, light pouring through the window. I poured myself another cup of tea and carried it to the balcony. Below, the city pulsed with energy. Cars crawled through intersections, horns bleating. A woman pedaled past on a bicycle, hair streaming behind her. A child licked an ice cream cone already melting down his wrist. Life moved forward, heedless of the drama unraveling in one family. The distance between me and them widened, and I felt steadier standing on this side of it. I sipped my tea and exhaled. For the first time in years, I didn't just feel free. I felt ready. Ready for the storm that would come, ready to stand without crumbling, ready to choose myself again and again, no matter what it cost. The afternoon stretched long and golden. I had expected the hours to crawl, heavy with the weight of their silence, but instead time moved like water, steady and smooth. I cooked a simple lunch, pasta with garlic, olive oil, and a handful of spinach. The scent filled the apartment, earthy and clean. I ate at the table by the window, letting the warmth of the sun soak my skin. Each bite reminded me that this, too, was mine. My food, my choice, my moment. After lunch, I took a notebook from the shelf, its cover still crisp from being new. The laptop file I had started earlier felt like armor, but I wanted more than a record. I wanted reflection. So I opened to the first page and began to write in long, looping sentences. Not just what had happened, but how it had felt. The exhaustion that had lived in my bones, the years of walking on eggshells, of carrying someone else's messes as if they were my own. The quiet resentment of always being the one who held the line. The words poured out. I wrote about the fear, too. The way I used to hesitate before answering my phone, never knowing if it would be another crisis, another demand, another emergency that only I could solve. I wrote about the anger that followed, the anger at Adrian for never growing up, at my parents for never holding him accountable, at myself for always giving in. By the time I stopped, my hand ached and the page was filled with jagged lines of ink. I closed the notebook and set it aside, feeling lighter. Writing it down didn't change the past, but it claimed it. It was no longer a shadow pressed against my ribs. It was visible, real, something I could hold. The rest of the afternoon passed in small rituals. I watered the plants on the windowsill, their leaves glossy and green. I reorganized the shelf of books in the living room, grouping them by color just because it pleased me. I stretched out on the couch and listened to a record, the music filling the space with warmth. These acts might have looked trivial from the outside, but to me they were declarations. This life was not a waiting room for my family's chaos. It was a home. Still, as evening approached, unease crept in. I knew the silence wouldn't last. I knew my family. They weren't the type to accept boundaries. They would find a way back in, whether through guilt, anger, or sheer persistence. The thought didn't send me into panic this time. Instead, it steeled me. I would meet them when they came, and I would not bend. I opened the laptop again and began scanning through old emails, receipts, messages, anything that showed the pattern. The overdraft notices I had covered, the texts from Adrian begging for help, the thank yous that had always come with an undertone of expectation. I saved them into a folder, labeling it clearly, proof. A part of me hated that it had come to this, that I had to prepare for battle against the people who were supposed to protect me, but another part of me found strength in the clarity. No more pretending, no more denial. When the folder was full, I leaned back and stared at the screen. My reflection stared back at me, pale in the glow of the monitor. For years I had been the reliable daughter, the one who never faltered. Now I looked like someone else, someone older, sharper, but also freer. The phone buzzed once on the table, startling me. I didn't pick it up. I knew it was them. I let it go dark again. Night fell slowly. The sky shifted from gold to violet to black, stars scattered faintly across the horizon. I poured a glass of wine and stepped out onto the balcony. The air was cool, carrying the scent of grilled food from a restaurant down the street. Laughter floated up from a group of friends walking below, their voices mingling with the hum of traffic. I raised the glass to my lips and drank slowly. The city didn't care about my family's storm. It moved on, alive and indifferent. And in that indifference, I found peace. Before bed, I picked up the notebook again and wrote one final line for the day. I am not their anchor anymore, I am my own. When I closed the book, the silence of the apartment felt different. Not empty, Not fragile, strong, intentional, and as I turned off the light and lay down, I felt it settle inside me, readiness. The storm would come. I could already hear its distant rumble. But this time, I wasn't afraid. The knock came earlier than I expected. It was Saturday again, the kind of Saturday that promised warmth but delivered dampness instead. The morning sky was heavy with clouds, the air thick with the smell of rain. I had just settled on the couch with a fresh cup of coffee when the sound echoed through the apartment. 3 hard knocks, sharp and insistent, not the kind of knock a neighbor used when they wanted to borrow sugar. I froze, the mug hovering near my lips. For a moment I told myself it could be anyone, a delivery at the wrong door, a maintenance worker, a stranger who had lost their way. But deep down I already knew. The knock came again, louder this time. I set the mug down, my hands trembling slightly despite the calm I tried to project. I crossed the living room slowly, each step deliberate. My heart thudded against my ribs. When I reached the door, I looked through the peephole. And there they were. Mom stood closest, her face tight with a mix of hope and desperation. Dad hovered behind her, jaw clenched, his posture rigid with restrained fury. Adrian leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his expression a mask of disdain. For a long moment I didn't move. I just stared at them through the glass unseen, the barrier between us suddenly the most precious thing in the world. "Liliana," Mom called, her voice muffled but urgent. "We know you're in there. Please open the door." I closed my eyes. So this was it. The pause was over. The storm had arrived. I unlocked the door but didn't open it right away. The metallic click must have carried because Mom exhaled sharply in relief. I pulled the door open just enough to lean against the frame, blocking the entrance with my body. "Hello," I said, my voice calm. Mom's eyes widened as if she hadn't expected me to sound so steady. "Sweetheart, why didn't you tell us you moved? Do you know what you put us through last weekend?" "I told you," I replied. "I don't live there anymore." Dad's voice cut in, low and sharp. "This isn't acceptable, Liliana. You blindsided us. Do you have any idea what it was like showing up there with Adrian's things? Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" I tilted my head slightly. "Humiliating for whom?" Adrian finally spoke, his tone dripping with contempt. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Selling the condo behind our backs, hiding out here like some kind of queen. You're pathetic." The words landed like stones, but they didn't cut the way they once would have. Instead, I let them fall between us, useless. "I'm not hiding," I said. "I'm living. There's a difference." Mom reached out, her hand brushing against the doorframe as if she might push past me. "We just need a little help, that's all. Adrian needs a place to stay while he gets back on his feet. Just a few months until he finds work. You have the space. Why are you being so cold?" I felt the heat rise in my chest but kept my tone even. "Because it's not my responsibility, not anymore." Her face crumpled, her voice trembling. "You're his sister. Family takes care of each other." I met her eyes steady. "I have taken care of him for years, for too many years, and all it did was teach him that someone else would always clean up his mess." Dad's fists tightened at his sides. "You're being dramatic. He just needs support. Everyone stumbles sometimes." "Stumbling is different from refusing to stand," I said, "and I'm not the floor anymore." For a moment, silence hung heavy between us. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic below, the faint patter of rain beginning against the windows. Then Adrian stepped forward, his voice rising. "Fine. If you don't let me stay here, don't expect me to have anything to do with you ever again. You'll regret this when you're alone." I almost laughed. The threat was hollow, a mirror held up to his own fear. "That's your choice," I said simply. Mom's tears spilled over, streaking down her cheeks. "Liliana, please, don't do this. You're tearing this family apart." "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm refusing to be torn apart with it." The words seemed to stun them. Even Adrian's smirk faltered. I stepped back, keeping my hand on the door. "I think you should go now." Mom shook her head frantically. "We're not leaving. Not until you do the right thing." The rain picked up, tapping harder against the windows. My heart hammered, but my hands were steady. I knew what was coming. And for the first time, I was ready. The rain fell harder, streaking the glass of the hallway window, the sound filling the silence between us. My family stood just outside my door, 3 figures in a tableau of expectation, each of them waiting for me to yield. It was the posture I had known all my life, Mom pleading, Dad commanding, Adrian sneering. But something had shifted. I wasn't bending, I wasn't moving. "Liliana," Mom tried again, her voice breaking as she pressed her palm against the doorframe. "You can't mean this. You can't truly want to watch your own brother thrown out into the street." I took a breath and let the air settle in my lungs before answering. "He's not being thrown out into the street. He's a grown man. He can find his own place." Adrian scoffed, rolling his eyes. You make it sound so simple. You think apartments just fall out of the sky. You think jobs just appear because you snap your fingers. Not when you're waiting for someone else to solve it for you, I said. The words struck harder than I intended. He flinched just slightly before his face hardened again. Dad stepped forward then, his height filling the narrow hallway. Enough of this. We've let you carry this cold attitude long enough. You owe your family better than this. Open the door and let us in. Something inside me snapped, not like glass but like a lock turning. I don't owe you my home, I said evenly. I don't owe you my life. I've given enough, more than enough, and I won't give any more. The look on Dad's face was one I hadn't seen before, not just anger but disbelief, as if he couldn't recognize the daughter standing before him. For years I had been the quiet one, the compliant one, the steady one. Now I was a wall he couldn't move. Mom's tears came faster, her voice rising with desperation. Sweetheart, please, this isn't you. This bitterness, this selfishness, it's not who you are. I held her gaze, calm and unshaken. It is who I am, you just never wanted to see it. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of the rain grew louder, filling the hallway with its rhythm. Adrian shifted uncomfortably, his arms tightening across his chest. Dad's jaw worked as if he were grinding down words he couldn't quite release. Finally, Adrian exploded. This is ridiculous. I'm not leaving. You can't make me. You've got 2 bedrooms in there. What's the big deal? I'll just crash on the couch if I have to. You won't even notice I'm here. He tried to step forward, but I blocked the doorway with my body, my hand braced firmly on the door. You're not coming in, Adrian. Not now, not ever. His face twisted, anger flushing his skin. What kind of sister are you? He spat. Do you want me to fail? Do you want me to end up on the street, a total disaster? You'll have to live with that if it happens. I've lived with your disasters already, I said, my voice low, and I'm done. The words seemed to hang in the air like smoke, heavy and undeniable. Mom let out a sob, pressing her hands together as if in prayer. Please, Liliana, just give him a chance, just a little time. You have such a good heart, I know you do. Don't let it close. Her plea tugged at me the way it always had. But instead of bending, I felt a wave of clarity rise in me. A good heart doesn't mean a life without boundaries, I said softly. And mine has been stretched to breaking. I won't let it break again. Dad's voice cut through, colder now. You'll regret this. When you're older, when you're alone, when you realize that family was all you had, you'll regret turning us away. I met his eyes and for the first time felt no fear. If family means being used until there's nothing left of me, then I'd rather have nothing. The words left a silence deeper than before. Even Adrian didn't reply. They stood there, wet from the rain, their faces a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief. Finally, I stepped back just slightly and tightened my grip on the edge of the door. It's time for you to leave, I said. Mom shook her head violently. We're not leaving, not until you do the right thing. Her voice cracked on the last word, but I knew she meant it. They weren't going to walk away on their own. They never had. And as the realization settled over me, so did something else. Resolve. The storm wasn't over. It was only gathering strength. I closed the door slowly but firmly, the latch clicking into place with a sound that echoed in my chest. On the other side, I could still hear their voices, muffled now, urgent, insistent. Knuckles pounded against the wood, demands rising with the storm outside, but inside I stood still. My hands were steady. My breath was calm. For the first time, I was not the one who yielded. The pounding on the door went on for what felt like forever. Each thud rattled through the wood, through my bones. I stood in the center of the living room, my arms crossed tight against my chest, listening. Their voices rose and fell, muffled but relentless. Liliana, open this door right now. That was Dad, his tone carrying the same authority that had once kept me silent as a child. You can't keep us out forever, Adrian shouted. This is ridiculous. Mom's voice broke through, higher and thinner. Please, sweetheart, just let us talk. We'll work it out, I promise. I stared at the door, at the paint around the frame, at the knob they had no key to turn. For years, I had been their key, their entryway into every solution, their access point to stability. Now the lock was mine, the control mine, and I could feel the weight of it pressing against me. I tried to focus on my breathing, steady and slow. Inhale, exhale. I told myself not to shake, not to crumble. But the truth is, my hands trembled as I reached for the phone on the table. Calling the police on your own family isn't something you plan for. It isn't something you imagine until the moment arrives and you realize it's the only option left. I sat on the edge of the couch, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the keypad. Their voices continued outside, insistent, demanding. My chest ached with the push and pull of guilt and anger. Could I really do this? Could I cross this line? I closed my eyes and saw the list I had written, the ledger of every debt I had covered, every lie I had told, every night I had lost to their chaos. I remembered the sting of Dad's disappointment, the edge of Adrian's insults, the weight of Mom's tears. I remembered the exhaustion that had carved lines into my face long before their time. And I knew, yes, I could do this because I had to. I dialed. When the operator answered, my voice surprised me. It was calm, steady, even. Yes, I said. I need to report a disturbance. There are 3 people outside my apartment refusing to leave. They're pounding on the door, shouting, I feel unsafe. The words hung in the air after I said them, almost unreal. 3 people. Not my parents, not my brother, just 3 people. That was the truth I needed. The operator asked for details, for my address, for descriptions. I gave them all, each word landing with the weight of finality. When she told me an officer was on the way, I thanked her and hung up. The pounding hadn't stopped. The shouts hadn't quieted, but something inside me had shifted. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't begging them to stop. I had acted. I stood and walked slowly toward the door. I didn't open it, but I pressed my hand against the wood, feeling the vibrations of their fists on the other side. For a moment, I almost whispered goodbye. Goodbye to the version of me who would have opened the door. Goodbye to the life where their demands define me. Instead, I stepped back. I sat again on the couch. I waited. Minutes stretched long. The storm outside and the storm in the hallway merged into one relentless rhythm. My phone buzzed with another message, Mom again. I'm begging you, don't do this. We're family. I set the phone face down. When the knock came again, it was different. Firm, measured, official. A voice followed, deep and commanding. Police department. Open the door, ma'am. My breath caught. It was happening. The line had been crossed. I stood, unlocked the door, and opened it. 2 uniformed officers stood in the hallway, their presence filling the narrow space. Behind them, my family froze. Mom's tear-streaked face turned toward me in shock. Dad's mouth fell open. Adrian's arms dropped from his chest. Ma'am, one officer said, we received a call. Is everything all right here? I met his eyes, steady. No, I said. They won't leave me alone. The words silenced everything. The hallway felt smaller now, compressed by the presence of uniforms and authority. The 2 officers stood firm, their expressions professional but alert. Behind them, my family looked as if the ground had disappeared beneath their feet. Mom's hand was still raised in mid-gesture, frozen. Dad's fists were tight at his sides, his face drained of color. Adrian's bravado slipped, his smirk replaced by something closer to disbelief. One of the officers spoke first, his voice calm but edged with command. We're here to de-escalate. Can you explain the situation? I stood in the doorway, my voice steady. They've been here for over an hour. Knocking, shouting, refusing to leave. I asked them to go, but they won't. I don't feel safe. The officer nodded slowly, turning his attention to my parents and Adrian. Is that true? Have you refused to leave when asked? Mom shook her head furiously, her tears streaming. No, you don't understand. We're family. We're not strangers bothering her. We're her parents, her brother. This is a misunderstanding. She's confused. She doesn't mean this. Her words tumbled over each other, desperate, clinging to the story she wanted to tell. But the officer didn't soften. Family or not, if the resident has asked you to leave, you need to leave. Dad's voice erupted then, louder than I'd ever heard it. This is absurd. She's our daughter. She owes us her respect. She owes us her help. You can't possibly support this madness. The second officer stepped forward slightly, his tone firmer. Sir, what we support is the law. And the law says that she decides who is allowed in her home. If she says leave, you leave. If you refuse, that's trespassing. The word hung in the air like a blade, trespassing. My family had never imagined they could be called that. They had always believed they belonged wherever I was, that my space was theirs by default. Adrian finally spoke, his voice cracking with fury. This is insane. She's turning you against us. She's lying, manipulating. You don't know what she's like, cold, selfish, heartless. I'm her brother. She's supposed to help me. His words hit the wall of silence that followed, echoing down the hallway. I stepped forward slightly, my hand still on the door. My voice was calm, quiet, but it cut through everything. I'm not heartless. I've just decided not to drown with you anymore. Adrian's mouth opened, then shut again. Mom sobbed harder. Dad's face twisted, caught between rage and something else, fear maybe or recognition. The first officer spoke again, his tone final. It's time to go, all of you, right now. Mom reached out toward me, her fingers trembling. Please, Liliana, don't do this. We're your family. Without you, what are we? I looked at her hand, at the tears shining on her face. For a moment, the weight of years pressed against me, the late nights, the whispered promises, the times I had stepped in and saved them. I could feel the tug of habit, the instinct to yield, but I stayed still. My eyes met hers, and I said the words I had carried in my chest for years. I'm not abandoning you. I'm abandoning the role you forced me to play. I won't be your safety net anymore. If you're sinking, you'll have to learn how to swim." The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before. Even the officers seemed to pause, as if the air itself had shifted. Then the second officer gestured firmly toward the elevator. "It's time, move along." Slowly, reluctantly, my family obeyed. Dad turned first, stiff and furious, his jaw set. Adrian followed, muttering curses under his breath, his eyes flashing at me like daggers. Mom lingered the longest, her gaze clinging to mine as if she could pull me back with sheer will, but finally she let the officers guide her away. Their footsteps echoed down the hall, fading with each step. The sound of the elevator doors closing was like the click of a lock sealing shut. I stood there in the doorway, my body trembling, my breath uneven. The officers turned back to me. "Are you all right, ma'am?" the first one asked. I nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm all right." They gave me a few instructions, their voices calm, routine. "Call again if they return. Keep the door locked. Trust that I had the right to my own space." When they finally left, the hallway fell silent again, the storm gone. I closed the door, leaned against it, and let the silence sink deep into me. My chest rose and fell, my heart slowing, the trembling fading. For years, I had believed that protecting myself meant betraying them. But in that moment, I understood the truth. Protecting myself was the only way I could finally live. And I was alive. The silence after they left was almost unbearable in its weight. It pressed against the walls, seeped into the floorboards, and wrapped itself around me like a heavy cloak. For years, I had begged for silence, dreamed of peace, imagined what it would feel like to breathe without someone else's voice dictating my every move. Now I had it, and it felt strange, almost foreign. I moved through the apartment slowly, as though reacquainting myself with the space. My hand traced the back of the couch, the edge of the bookshelf, the cool glass of the window. Everything was the same as it had been an hour ago, and yet everything had changed. I had crossed a line I could never uncross. The knock of the officers' boots in the hallway still echoed in my ears. The look on my parents' faces, shock, betrayal, disbelief, burned into my memory. Adrian's curses rang faintly in the back of my mind. But louder than all of it was the sound of my own voice, steady and calm, telling them I would no longer be their safety net. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like a wound stitched shut too quickly, still raw underneath. I poured a glass of water and drank it in slow sips, forcing myself to stay grounded. My phone lit up on the table, buzzing with new notifications. I ignored it for as long as I could, but curiosity eventually pulled me in. The first thing I saw was a social media post from my mother. A photo of Adrian as a child, smiling in the sun, his arm draped around my shoulders. Her caption was short but devastating. "Sometimes the people you love most turn their backs when you need them the most." "Pray for us." The comments were already piling in. Messages of sympathy, outrage, judgment. People who had no idea what had really happened were lining up to take sides. Some scolded me without knowing my name. Others sent hearts and prayers to my family. My throat tightened as I scrolled. It was one thing to stand up to them in private. It was another to see the story distorted, broadcast to the world. But then I remembered the folder on my laptop. Proof. Years of it. Every receipt, every message, every late-night call. They wanted to tell the world their version of me. I had my own version to share. I opened my laptop, pulled up the file, and copied the most damning examples. Not everything. I didn't want to expose every detail, but enough to show a pattern. Enough to make it undeniable. Then I wrote, "For years I've carried responsibilities that were never mine. I've paid debts that weren't mine, covered mistakes that weren't mine, and carried burdens no one ever acknowledged. Last weekend my family expected me to continue as though nothing had changed. When I refused, they tried to force their way into my home. I asked them to leave. They wouldn't. So I did the only thing I could do. I protected myself. I attached the screenshots. The late-night messages begging for bail money. The receipts of loans never repaid. The cold, cutting insults when I finally said no. I didn't add commentary. I didn't explain further. I let the evidence speak. When I hit post, my hands trembled. The moment the words went live, I knew there was no turning back. Notifications exploded almost immediately. Some people defended me, applauded my strength. Others doubled down on the accusations, calling me heartless, selfish, ungrateful. The divide was sharp and it cut deep. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to convince anyone. The truth was there. Visible. If they refused to see it, that was on them. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. The city outside my window glowed with evening lights, cars threading through the streets like veins of fire. Somewhere out there, people were laughing in restaurants, walking hand in hand, living their lives untouched by my drama. I lifted my glass of water and whispered softly to myself, "This is mine now, my life, my choice." The words steadied me. The post spread faster than I expected. By the next morning, my inbox overflowed. Messages from strangers I would never meet. Some thanked me for speaking up, for setting boundaries they themselves had never dared to set. Others condemned me with venom, calling me selfish, cruel, ungrateful. The words blurred together until they became noise, a chorus of voices that didn't know me but felt entitled to judge. At first, I read every comment, every message. My heart raced with each notification, my stomach tightening as I scrolled. But after an hour, I stopped. It was endless and it was meaningless. The people who understood didn't need more from me. The ones who didn't never would. I closed the laptop and pushed it aside. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy silence of before. It was lighter now, filled with the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the pipes, the faint whir of the ceiling fan, ordinary sounds, grounding sounds. I stood in the middle of the living room and let them wash over me. My phone buzzed again. This time, a message from Mom, just 3 words, "How could you?" I stared at it for a long moment. Then I pressed down, held the screen until the option appeared and blocked the number. One by one, I did the same for Dad, for Adrian. Each click was a small release, a thread cut, a weight lifted. When the last number disappeared from my contacts, I set the phone down and exhaled. The day passed slowly, but without dread. I made breakfast, eggs and toast, eaten warm for once instead of cold between interruptions. I read a book on the couch, the kind of novel that pulled me into someone else's world. I walked through the park in the afternoon, the air cool and fresh, children laughing on the swings, dogs chasing sticks. No one there knew my story, no one cared. I was just another woman enjoying the day. The anonymity was bliss. That evening, I returned home and brewed tea. I carried the mug to the balcony and stepped out into the twilight. The city stretched before me, glittering with lights, alive with sound. Cars honked in the distance, laughter floated up from the street, music spilled faintly from an open window somewhere nearby. I leaned against the railing, the steam from the tea curling into the night air. For so long, I had lived as though I were a lifeline, as though my existence was defined by the crises of others. But standing there, the skyline glowing against the darkening sky, I realized I was something else entirely. I was free. My phone lit up once more on the table behind me. A final notification, a reminder of a world I had stepped out of. I didn't move to check it. I let it glow and fade until it went dark again. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. It was mine. I sipped my tea, letting the warmth spread through me. For the first time, the quiet wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. I closed my eyes and breathed in the night air. When I opened them again, the city stretched wide and endless before me, a promise waiting to be lived. And I smiled.